What if the most broken soul at the auction wasn't the man, but the dog no one wanted? In Montana's harsh wilderness, a traumatized ex-Marine and an abused military pit bull uncover a government conspiracy that will change their lives forever. This isn't just another rescue story. It's a heart-pounding tale of redemption and the unbreakable bond between two wounded warriors fighting a system that discarded them both. Stay with me to discover how Jake and Brutus exposed a secret military program and changed animal welfare laws across America. Subscribe now and comment where you're watching from. Let's see how far this incredible story can reach. The autumn wind whispered through the pines surrounding Emily Carter's modest cabin, carrying with it the first hint of winter's bite. At 43, Emily had grown accustomed to the sounds of Silver Creek's forests at night, the hooting of great horned owls, the occasional rustle of deer moving through underbrush, the distant yipping of coyotes. Tonight, however, something felt different. Emily sat bolt upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The digital clock on her nightstand cast a pale blue glow across her bedroom. 2:17 a.m. She pushed aside her quilt, a handmade heirloom from her grandmother, and swung her feet onto the cold wooden floor. Her fingers fumbled for the reading glasses she kept beside a dog-eared copy of Thoreau's Walden. What was that? She whispered to herself, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. Emily had moved to Silver Creek 5 years ago after her divorce, seeking solitude and a simpler life away from Pittsburgh's constant noise. The cabin by Evergreen Lake had seemed perfect, isolated enough for privacy, yet only a 15-minute drive from town. She moved to the window and pulled back the checkered curtains. The nearly full moon illuminated the clearing around her home, silvering the frost on the grass. Beyond, the lake's surface rippled with gentle waves. Then she heard it again, a sound that didn't belong in these woods. A whimper, followed by splashing. Emily's brow furrowed as she strained to see the shoreline. "That's not a raccoon," she muttered, reaching for the flannel robe hanging on her bedpost. "Or a fox." Emily had always been the cautious type. Her ex-husband used to mock her for it. Live a little, not everything's a potential disaster. But living alone had only heightened her vigilance. She grabbed the heavy mag light from her dresser drawer and the pepper spray she kept nearby. Small-town Pennsylvania might feel safe, but Emily believed in preparedness. As she stepped onto her porch, the cold October air bit through her robe. The wooden steps creaked beneath her slippered feet. Emily paused, sweeping her flashlight across the tree line. "Hello?" she called out, her voice sounding smaller than she'd intended. "Is someone there?" Only the wind answered, rustling the remaining leaves on the maples. Emily pulled her robe tighter and began walking toward the lake, following the narrow dirt path she'd worn over countless morning walks. The sounds grew more distinct as she approached, desperate splashing, punctuated by what could only be described as a cry for help. Emily quickened her pace, flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the ground. Her mind raced with possibilities. A lost hiker? A drunk teenager who'd wandered too far from a bonfire party? Or something more sinister? As the trees parted, revealing the moonlit shore of Evergreen Lake, Emily stopped dead in her tracks. There, about 20 feet from the bank, thrashing in the shallows near a muddy inlet, was a dark shape. "Oh my God," she breathed, raising her flashlight. The beam caught two reflective eyes, wild with panic. A dog, a large one, was struggling to free itself from the lake's muddy bottom. Its muzzle lifted above the water as it fought to keep its head up, each desperate movement seeming to sink it deeper into the muck. Without hesitation, Emily rushed forward, her slippers sinking into the cold, wet sand. "Hold on," she shouted. "I'm coming. Just hold on." She had no idea how she would save it, or why a dog would be in the lake at this hour, but Emily Carter knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something had called her from her bed tonight for a reason, and she wasn't going back until she answered that call. The dog's desperate barks echoed across the still water as Emily scrambled to the lake's edge. Under the moonlight, she could now see it was a German shepherd, its coat dark and matted, its powerful body trapped in the thick, clay-like mud of the inlet. "Easy there, easy," Emily called out, her voice intentionally gentle despite her racing heart. She swept her flashlight along the shoreline, looking for anything she could use. 20 feet away, an old rowboat was tethered to a weathered dock. a remnant from the previous owner that Emily had never bothered to use. Inside the boat lay coils of rope, forgotten fishing equipment, and a broken oar. "Thank God," she whispered, grabbing the rope. Her fingers, already stiff from the cold, worked quickly to fashion a crude lasso. The dog's struggles were weakening, its efforts becoming more lethargic. "Stay with me," Emily pleaded, wading ankle-deep into the frigid water. "Don't give up now." She cast the rope once, twice, 3 times before the loop finally settled around the dog's torso. With a silent prayer, Emily pulled. The mud made a horrible sucking sound as it reluctantly released its grip. Inch by inch, the dog moved toward shore, its eyes never leaving Emily's face. When it finally reached the shallows, Emily gasped. The dog's body was covered in leeches, at least a dozen of them clinging to its belly and legs. Worse, beneath the mud and parasites, she could see old scars crisscrossing its flanks. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, kneeling beside the exhausted animal. The German shepherd tried to stand but collapsed, a low whine escaping its throat. Emily hesitated. A wounded animal could be dangerous, but something in the dog's eyes stopped her fear. There was intelligence there, and something else. Trust, perhaps, or hope. "I'm going to help you," she said firmly, removing her robe to wrap around the shivering animal. "But you've got to help me too, okay? I can't carry you." As if understanding, the dog made another attempt to rise, this time leaning heavily against Emily's legs for support. Together, they began the slow journey back to the cabin. Inside, Emily's bathroom became a makeshift veterinary clinic. She filled the tub with lukewarm water and, speaking in soothing tones, coaxed the reluctant dog into it. The shepherd trembled violently but didn't resist as Emily carefully removed the leeches with tweezers, dropping them into a jar of salt water. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" she murmured, gently washing away the mud to reveal more scars. Some looked like old bite marks, others like burns. Most disturbing was a partially healed wound on the dog's right shoulder that resembled a bullet graze. After drying the dog with her softest towels, Emily made a bed of blankets near the fireplace. She offered water in a mixing bowl, which the shepherd lapped up eagerly, and then some leftover chicken from her dinner. "You need a name," Emily said, watching the dog devour the food. "At least until we find out where you belong." She studied the shepherd's face, intelligent, dignified despite its ordeal. "Though something tells me you don't want to go back where you came from." The dog's ears perked up, and for a moment, Emily could have sworn it understood every word. As the fire crackled and the first hints of dawn appeared through the windows, Emily sat on the floor beside her unexpected guest, gently stroking its still damp fur. The dog's breathing had steadied, and it had finally allowed its eyes to close. "Tomorrow we'll figure this out," she promised, more to herself than to the sleeping animal. "Dr. Hayes will know what to do." Emily hadn't planned on a pet. Her quiet, orderly life had no room for the chaos of animal ownership. Yet as she watched the German shepherd's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep, she felt something shift inside her, a protective instinct she hadn't experienced in years. "Sleep well," she whispered, rising to make coffee. "You're safe now." What Emily couldn't know, as morning light spilled across her kitchen floor, was that saving this dog would be the first step in a journey that would uncover Silver Creek's darkest secret and change her life forever. The waiting room of Silver Creek Animal Clinic smelled of antiseptic and pet shampoo. Emily sat on a hard plastic chair, the German shepherd pressed against her leg, its eyes darting nervously at every sound. Though clearly exhausted, the dog had refused to be left at the cabin, limping to the door each time Emily tried to leave without it. "It's okay," she reassured, gently stroking its head. "Dr. Hayes is good people." The clinic's receptionist, Donna Perkins, who also served as the town's most efficient gossip hub, kept glancing their way. Emily could practically see the questions forming behind Donna's heavily mascaraed eyes. "That's Richard Holloway's dog, isn't it?" Donna finally asked, leaning across her desk. "Thought it went missing months ago." Emily tensed. "I found him stuck in the lake last night, nearly drowned." Before Donna could respond, the inner door opened, and Dr. Michael Hayes appeared. At 38, Hayes had the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in. His auburn hair was flecked with premature gray, and crow's feet crinkled at the corners of his blue eyes when he smiled. "Emily," he greeted warmly. Heard you had an emergency. His gaze shifted to the shepherd. Well, hello there. Let's get you two into exam room 3. Once inside, Hayes closed the door and motioned for Emily to help the dog onto the metal examination table. Tell me what happened, he said, donning latex gloves. As Emily recounted the night's events, Hayes conducted a thorough examination, his expression growing increasingly grim. He checked the dog's teeth, eyes, and ears, ran practiced hands along its spine, and carefully assessed each visible wound. This isn't good, Emily, he finally said, his voice low. These aren't fresh injuries, except for some minor cuts from last night. These scars, someone's been abusing this animal systematically. And this, he pointed to the shoulder wound, that's definitely a bullet graze. Maybe a month old. Emily's stomach nodded. Donna mentioned Richard Holloway. Hayes's jaw tightened. Holloway has a reputation for treating his hunting dogs poorly. But this, he shook his head. This goes beyond neglect. Will he be okay? Emily asked, meeting the shepherd's intelligent gaze. Physically, with proper care, yes. He's malnourished, but not critically. The psychological trauma. Hayes shrugged. That's harder to assess. German shepherds are resilient, but also deeply sensitive. He moved to a cabinet and began gathering supplies. I want to give him some antibiotics for those wounds, update his vaccinations assuming they're overdue, and take blood to check for internal issues. But Emily, he turned to face her directly. If this is Holloway's dog, there could be trouble. What kind of trouble? Hayes sighed, running a hand through his hair. Holloway owns half this county, including the building that houses my clinic. His family's been in Silver Creek for generations. People don't cross him, especially not over an animal. Emily straightened her shoulders. I'm not returning this dog to someone who shoots and tortures it. A small smile touched Hayes's lips. Didn't think you would. Just wanted you to understand what you might be getting into. He filled a syringe with clear liquid. Hold him steady now. As Hayes administered the injection, Emily stroked the dog's fur, whispering reassurances. Does he have a microchip? She asked. Let's check. Hayes ran a scanner over the dog's neck and shoulders. No chip. That's interesting. Most registered breeders chip their animals. So officially, he could be a stray? Hayes met her eyes. Officially, yes. But Silver Creek is a small town, Emily. People talk. Let them talk, she replied, her voice firm. I'm not giving him back. After completing the examination and treatments, Hayes handed Emily a bag of supplies, antibiotics, medicated shampoo, high-quality dog food, and a sturdy collar and leash. On the house, he said when she reached for her wallet. Consider it my contribution to canine welfare. As they walked toward the exit, Hayes stopped her with a gentle touch on her arm. Emily, be careful. If you're keeping him, you should know, Holloway doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. He's got friends in the sheriff's department, on the town council. Are you saying I should be afraid of him? Hayes's expression was solemn. I'm saying everyone else is. Maybe with good reason. Outside the clinic, Emily helped the shepherd into her Subaru. As she closed the door, she noticed a black pickup truck idling across the street, its windshield reflecting the morning sun. The driver was watching her, his face shadowed by a baseball cap. The truck pulled away as soon as she noticed it, disappearing around the corner with a growl of its engine. Come on, boy, Emily murmured, climbing into the driver's seat. Let's go home. The bell above Turner's General Store jingled as Emily pushed through the door, her shopping list clutched in one hand. After 3 days of nursing the German shepherd back to health, she had finally felt comfortable leaving him alone at the cabin while she restocked her depleted pantry. Morning, Emily, called Sam Turner from behind the counter. At 72, Sam was Silver Creek's oldest shopkeeper, his family having run the store since Prohibition days. Heard you got yourself a dog. Emily smiled tightly. News traveled fast in towns of 3,200 people. That's right. Good for you. Sam nodded approvingly. Everyone needs company, especially living out by the lake like you do. As Emily pushed her cart down the canned goods aisle, she became aware of hushed voices falling silent at her approach. 2 women, Brenda Collins from the library and Margaret Wilson, who taught 3rd grade, were suddenly very interested in different brands of kidney beans. Hi, Brenda, Margaret. Emily greeted them with forced cheerfulness. Emily, Brenda responded, her smile not reaching her eyes. How are you settling in with your new pet? The pause was deliberate, loaded with meaning. Very well, thanks. Emily replied, reaching past them for a can of soup. That's quite a responsibility you've taken on, Margaret added, her voice pitched just a bit too high. I hear he's a special case. Emily placed the can in her cart, meeting Margaret's gaze directly. He needed help. I helped him. Nothing special about basic decency. As she moved toward the produce section, Emily could feel their eyes on her back, could almost hear the whispers resuming. Near the apples, Sheriff Deputy Jim Larson was selecting oranges while his wife debated between types of lettuce. Emily nodded a greeting, but Larson merely tipped his hat, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Carter, he said formally, how's that dog of yours doing? The question seemed innocent, but something in his tone made Emily's skin prickle. He's recovering nicely. Thanks for asking. That's good to hear. Larson set down the oranges he'd been examining. You know, lost pets should be reported to animal control. It's county ordinance. Emily filled a bag with Granny Smith's, keeping her voice casual. He wasn't lost, Deputy. He was abandoned, injured, and left to die. Larson's wife suddenly found great interest in a display of organic kale. Strong allegations, Larson said quietly. Best be careful about making accusations without proof. I wasn't making accusations, Emily replied. Just stating facts. That dog was shot and beaten. Those are facts, not allegations. Larson stepped closer, lowering his voice. Richard Holloway called the station yesterday. Says his hunting dog went missing back in August. German Shepherd, 3 years old. Valuable animal. Emily felt cold despite the store's overwarm heating. Does he have proof of ownership? Registration papers? Vet records? Says he does. Larson shrugged. Just thought you should know. Holloway's not the type to let things go. Neither am I, Emily said, meeting his gaze steadily. As Larson moved away, Emily became aware of another presence. Franklin Moore, Silver Creek's oldest resident at 91, stood watching her from beside a stack of cereal boxes, his gnarled hands resting on a wooden cane. Don't let them rattle you, girl, he said, his voice crackling like autumn leaves. Holloway's got half this town in his pocket, but not all of it. Emily smiled genuinely for the first time that morning. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Franklin, please. He shuffled closer. That dog of yours. He's got more significance than you know. What do you mean? Franklin's roomy eyes darted around the store. Not here. Too many years. Stop by my place on your way home. Yellow house on Maple Street. We need to talk. Before Emily could question him further, he hobbled away toward the pharmacy counter. At the checkout, Sam Turner rang up Emily's groceries with unusual efficiency, avoiding small talk. As he handed her the receipt, he leaned forward. Be careful, Emily, he murmured. Holloway's been asking questions. Sent his foreman Jeffrey Leeds in here yesterday, asking who found his dog. Thanks for the warning, Sam. Outside, Emily loaded her groceries into her Subaru, an uneasy feeling settling between her shoulder blades. As she closed the trunk, she noticed a piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. She unfolded it to find a crudely written message. Return what isn't yours or pay the price. Emily crumpled the note and tossed it into a nearby trash can, her hands trembling slightly. As she slid into the driver's seat, she caught sight of the same black pickup she'd seen outside the vet clinic, parked at the far end of the lot. She started the engine quickly, her mind racing. What had Franklin meant about the dog's significance? And why would a wealthy landowner like Holloway care so much about one mistreated animal? Emily pulled out of the parking lot, checking her rearview mirror repeatedly. Instead of heading straight home, she turned toward Maple Street, determined to hear what Franklin Moore knew. One thing was becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't just about a rescued dog anymore. Franklin Moore's yellow Victorian stood out among the more modest homes on Maple Street, a relic from Silver Creek's more prosperous past. The wraparound porch sagged slightly in the middle, and flaking paint revealed decades of different colors beneath, a living timeline of the house's history. Emily parked on the street and carried a bag of groceries, bread, fresh fruit, and a homemade apple pie from Turner's Bakery section, up the cracked concrete path. Before she could knock, the door swung open. Been watching for you, Franklin said, stepping aside to let her in. Getting hard to see these days, but I can still make out that blue car of yours. The interior of Franklin's home was like stepping into a museum of Americana. Vintage photographs lined the walls, furniture from at least 3 different eras filled the rooms, and a record player, not a reproduction, but an original Victrola, sat in the corner of the living room. Sit, sit. Franklin gestured to a worn leather armchair. I'll put on some tea. Can't talk properly without tea. Emily settled into the chair, taking in her surroundings while Franklin shuffled into the kitchen. A black and white photograph on the side table caught her attention, a much younger Franklin standing proudly beside a group of miners, all of them covered in coal dust but smiling broadly. Silver Creek Mine, 1952, Franklin explained, returning with a tray of mismatched teacups. Before it closed, before Holloway's father turned the land into that fancy estate. You worked in the mines? Emily asked, accepting a steaming cup. 37 years, Franklin nodded, lowering himself into a rocking chair opposite her. Knew every tunnel, every shaft. Knew the Holloways too, 3 generations of them now. His face darkened, each worse than the last. He sipped his tea, studying Emily over the rim of his cup. You're wondering why I asked you here? Why I mentioned that dog? Yes, Emily admitted. Franklin set down his cup with a slight clatter. What do you know about Ethan Brooks? The name meant nothing to Emily. I don't think I've met him. And you won't, Franklin said grimly. Ethan was a migrant worker from Texas. Came up here last spring to work at Holloway's farm. Young fella, maybe 30. Hard worker, by all accounts. He paused, his weathered hands wrapped around his teacup for warmth. Disappeared in August. Same time that dog went missing. Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. What happened to him? Official story is he just up and left. Packed his things and moved on. Common enough with seasonal workers. Franklin's eyes narrowed. But Ethan told my grandson he was planning to stay through winter. Had himself a girlfriend over in Harrisburg. Was saving for a ring. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe, Franklin conceded. Or maybe there's another reason he vanished without a word to anyone. Without collecting his last paycheck. Emily leaned forward. What does this have to do with the dog? Franklin's rocking chair creaked rhythmically. That German shepherd, Holloway called him Hunter, was always with Ethan. Followed him everywhere around the farm. Ethan had a way with animals, see. Even Holloway's mean-spirited beasts took to him. He paused, taking another sip of tea before continuing. 2 weeks before Ethan disappeared, Jeffrey Leeds, Holloway's foreman, was overheard at Mac's bar saying Ethan had stumbled onto something in the old barn. Something he wasn't supposed to see. What was it? Emily asked, her tea forgotten. Franklin shook his head. Leeds didn't say, but he was drunk enough to mention that the boss would handle it. Next day, Leeds denied saying anything at all. Called it drunk talk. Emily's mind raced. And then Ethan disappeared. Along with that dog, Franklin nodded. Until you pulled him from the lake. You think the dog knows something? Emily couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Franklin's expression remained deadly serious. I think that dog was with Ethan when whatever happened, happened. And I think Holloway believes that too. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper despite them being alone. Why else would a man like Richard Holloway, who treats his hunting dogs like tools, be so desperate to get one back? Emily remembered the bullet wound on the shepherd's shoulder, the multiple signs of abuse. If Holloway did something to Ethan, then that dog might be the only witness, Franklin finished for her. And Holloway tried to eliminate that witness. But somehow, that animal survived. The implications settled over Emily like a heavy blanket. I should go to the police. Franklin's harsh laugh held no humor. Sheriff Davis plays poker with Holloway every Thursday night. Has for 20 years. Deputy Larson's wife works as Holloway's personal secretary. He shook his head. No, the authorities in this county won't help you. Then what am I supposed to do? For now, keep that dog safe. And watch your back. Franklin reached for a faded manila folder on the side table. I've been collecting information. Newspaper clippings, things people have said about Holloway over the years. Suspected illegal activities, workers who've disappeared before. Nothing concrete enough for authorities outside the county to care, but maybe. He handed her the folder. Maybe there's something here that could help. As Emily accepted the folder, a car door slammed outside. Franklin moved to the window with surprising agility for his age, peering through a gap in the curtains. Black pickup, he muttered. Leeds. Emily joined him at the window. The truck was parked directly behind her Subaru, effectively blocking her in. Jeffrey Leeds, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a close-cropped gray beard, was examining her car, circling it slowly. Is there a back way out of here? Emily asked quietly. Franklin nodded. Through the kitchen. Gate leads to the alley. He gripped her arm with surprising strength. Be careful, Emily. What you've stumbled into, it's bigger than a mistreated dog. Much bigger. As she slipped out the back door, Emily clutched the folder to her chest, her mind whirling with questions. What had Ethan Brooks discovered? And how far would Richard Holloway go to keep it secret? The next evening found Emily and Michael Hayes hunched over Franklin's documents, which were spread across Emily's kitchen table. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, and occasional thunder rolled across the valley. The German Shepherd lay alert at Emily's feet, ears perking up at every unexpected sound. I still can't believe we're doing this, Michael said, rubbing his tired eyes. If Holloway finds out we're investigating him. Emily looked up from a yellowed newspaper clipping. You didn't have to come. Yes, I did, he replied simply. Their eyes held for a moment before both looked away. Over the past 2 days, Michael had become Emily's unexpected ally. When she'd called him with Franklin's story, he'd arrived at her cabin within the hour, medical bag and laptop in tow. Look at this, Emily said, pushing a document toward him. Tax records from the county assessor's office. Franklin must have requested these before we met. Michael scanned the page. Holloway Farm shows annual losses for the past 5 years, despite expanding operations. He frowned. How does a failing business keep buying land? Exactly. Emily pulled out another paper. And here, bank deposits that don't match reported income. Monthly cash deposits just under $10,000. Structured deposits. Michael nodded. Just under the reporting threshold for financial institutions. Classic money laundering technique. Emily raised an eyebrow. How does a veterinarian know about money laundering? A slight flush colored Michael's cheeks. I watch a lot of crime shows. The German Shepherd suddenly raised his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. What is it, boy? Emily asked, instinctively reaching for the baseball bat she'd started keeping nearby. Michael moved to the window, peering through the curtains. Nothing out there. Just the rain. The dog settled again, but remained vigilant, eyes fixed on the door. We should name him, Michael said, returning to the table. We can't keep calling him the dog or boy. Emily smiled despite the tension. I've been thinking about Ranger. He seems to patrol the property like it's his job. Ranger, Michael repeated, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. I like it. Turning back to the documents, Emily pulled out employee records Franklin had somehow obtained, possibly from his grandson who had briefly worked at the farm. Here's something on Ethan Brooks. Hired March 12th last year. No termination date listed. Michael pointed to a handwritten note at the bottom of the page. What's that? Emily squinted at the cramped writing. EB needs to be reminded about discretion. Barn incident cannot happen again. She looked up, meeting Michael's troubled gaze. What barn incident? I don't know, but look at the date, August 3rd. If Franklin's timeline is right, Ethan disappeared around the 17th. Emily rifled through more papers until she found what appeared to be a private investigator's report commissioned by Franklin. Listen to this. Subject's vehicle located at Greyhound Station in Harrisburg. Ticket purchased to El Paso, Texas under subject's name, but security footage inconclusive whether subject boarded the bus. Michael frowned. Someone could have bought that ticket using his ID. Exactly what I was thinking. Emily continued scanning the report. Wait, here's something else. Subject's personal effects never recovered from farm housing. Room appeared to be vacated in haste. Of note, blood evidence found on mattress. Tested positive for human blood type O positive. That's consistent with someone trying to cover up a crime, Michael said grimly. Make it look like he left voluntarily. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making them both jump. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. There's something we're missing, Emily said, frustration edging her voice. She turned to a final document, what appeared to be a handwritten ledger. Franklin noted this was found in Holloway's trash by one of the farm workers. Look at these entries. The ledger contained coded references, shipment P received, 25 units, and distribution C, 15 units, $175,000. Drug trafficking? Michael suggested. Maybe. Emily nodded. The amounts would match. But what's this last entry? She pointed to a final notation. EB problem resolved. H. Witnessed. Evidence contained. Michael went pale. Evidence contained. What if? What if the evidence is a body? Emily finished, the terrible possibility hanging in the air between them. Ranger suddenly stood, hackles raised, a deep growl emanating from his chest. This time, there was no mistaking the sound of tires on gravel outside. Michael moved swiftly to the window. Black SUV, he whispered. 2 men getting out. Emily gathered the documents with shaking hands, stuffing them into Franklin's folder. Is it Holloway? I can't tell. They're wearing rain gear. A heavy knock rattled the door. Ranger's growl intensified. Emily Carter, a gruff voice called. We need to talk to you about our boss's property. Emily motioned for Michael to follow her to the back of the cabin. There's a cellar access through the pantry, she whispered. Franklin's folder goes down there. We can't let them find it. As Michael concealed the documents, Emily grabbed her cell phone, quickly texting Franklin. Men at cabin. Holloway's. Call Sheriff Davis. Not Larson. Franklin's response was immediate. Davis out of town. Get out now. The knocking at the door became pounding. We know you're in there, Carter. Open up. Emily's mind raced. There was only one way out now, the small bathroom window that faced the woods. She grabbed Ranger's leash and her car keys. We need to make a run for it, she told Michael as he emerged from the pantry. Through the bathroom window. My car's parked behind the woodshed. And if they're watching the back. Emily gripped the baseball bat tighter. Then we fight our way out. The front door shuddered under a renewed assault. A voice shouted, last chance before we come in. With Ranger leading the way, Emily and Michael slipped into the darkened bathroom, eased open the window, and prepared to escape into the stormy night, carrying with them the evidence that might finally expose Silver Creek's darkest secret. Water sluiced off Emily's jacket as she, Michael, and Ranger huddled in Franklin Moore's living room. The old man passed them towels, his normally steady hands betraying his anxiety. You're lucky to be alive, Franklin muttered, peering out his window for the 3rd time in as many minutes. Leeds and that new fella, Wilson, they're Holloway's muscle. Not the type to ask politely twice. Emily toweled her hair, rainwater dripping onto the ancient Persian rug. They destroyed my front door? Just kicked it in like it was nothing. Police won't do anything, Franklin predicted grimly. Not with Davis out of town at that conference in Pittsburgh. Michael, who had been checking Ranger for injuries, looked up sharply. Davis is gone conveniently often when Holloway needs something done. How did they find us? Emily asked, accepting a mug of hot coffee from Franklin. We took back roads, parked 3 blocks away. No one followed us. Franklin's weathered face darkened. This town has eyes everywhere, girl. Holloway's made sure of that over the years. The German shepherds circled restlessly, still on edge from their narrow escape. They had barely made it through the bathroom window when Leeds and Wilson had broken down the front door. Only the heavy rain and darkness of the woods had hidden their escape route long enough to reach Emily's car. We can't stay here, Michael said, his doctor's eyes assessing Franklin's frail frame. We've put you in enough danger already. Franklin waved a dismissive hand. Been waiting 91 years to see a Holloway get what's coming to him. I'm not backing down now. He moved to an old roll-top desk in the corner, retrieving a tarnished key from a hidden compartment. Besides, I've got something that might help. He led them to the basement door, fumbling with an ancient padlock. The stairs creaked ominously as they descended into a surprisingly well-organized space. Filing cabinets lined one wall, a ham radio setup occupied another, and maps of Silver Creek, spanning different decades, covered a large central table. My war room, Franklin explained, noting their surprised expressions. Been collecting evidence on the Holloways for 40 years. Richard's father, Edgar, was just as corrupt, forced miners to work in unsafe conditions, bribed inspectors. When the mine collapsed in '72, killing 17 men, Edgar walked away clean. Emily stared at the comprehensive archives surrounding them. You've been waiting for a chance to expose them. Never had enough concrete evidence, Franklin nodded. Not until now. He opened a filing cabinet labeled H Incidents and extracted a thick folder. After you texted, I made some calls. Got an old buddy at the county records office to pull something for me. He spread out a large survey map on the table. This is Holloway's property, all 500 acres of it. The red circles mark places where soil has been disturbed in the past year, according to satellite imagery from the County Planning Commission. Michael leaned closer. There are a dozen marked sites. Most are legitimate. New fence posts, drainage work, that sort of thing, Franklin explained. But this one, he pointed to a mark near an abandoned barn on the property's western edge, disappeared in late August, right after Ethan Brooks disappeared. Emily felt cold despite the basement's warmth. You think Ethan is buried there? It's where I'd look, Franklin confirmed grimly. That barn hasn't been used in years. Perfect spot to hide something or someone. The basement door suddenly creaked above them. All three froze, and Ranger's hackles raised immediately. Franklin, a female voice called down. You down there with our guests? Franklin exhaled audibly. It's just Marion, he reassured them. My home health aide. A woman in her 50s appeared on the stairs, her nurse's scrubs partially covered by a rain jacket. Figured I'd find you all down here, plotting revolution, she said with a thin smile. There's a black pickup circling the neighborhood. Thought you should know. Emily exchanged alarmed glances with Michael. They've tracked us here. Marion shook her head. Not necessarily. Leeds does this sometimes. Drives around trying to intimidate Franklin when he thinks the old man is stirring up trouble. Franklin snorted. Which I usually am. Either way, Michael said, gathering up the maps, we need to leave. Now, is there another way out? Coal chute. Franklin nodded toward the far wall. Comes out behind Mrs. Abernathy's garden. She's been dead 10 years, but nobody's bought the place yet. As they hastily gathered the most crucial documents, Marion helped Franklin up the stairs. Where will you go? She asked. Emily hesitated. They couldn't return to her cabin. Michael's apartment above the veterinary clinic would be the first place Leeds would look. I have an idea, Michael said slowly. My cousin has a hunting cabin near Potter's Ridge. It's about 30 miles from here, completely off-grid. No one in town knows about it. You should go to the state police, Marion urged. This is beyond Silver Creek now. With what? Emily gestured at their folders. Financial irregularities? Suspicious soil disturbances? A missing migrant worker who officially left town on his own? We need something concrete before they'll act. Michael's expression hardened with sudden resolve. Then let's get something concrete. Emily stared at him. You don't mean? The barn, he confirmed. We need to see what's there. Franklin gripped Michael's arm with surprising strength. That's Holloway land. Armed guards patrol it at night. Not during a storm like this, Michael countered. And I know that property. I treat the livestock. There's a service road that cuts close to that western edge, barely used this time of year. Emily felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Breaking onto Holloway's property was madness, but Michael was right. Without hard evidence, no outside authority would intervene. As they prepared to leave through the coal chute, Franklin pressed something cold and heavy into Emily's hand, an old revolver, its blued steel worn from years of handling. Just in case, he said quietly. It was my father's. Still shoot straight. Emily stared at the weapon, then carefully tucked it into her jacket pocket. The weight of it felt both terrifying and reassuring. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the narrow alley behind the houses into a shallow stream. They moved quickly through Mrs. Abernathy's overgrown garden, keeping close to the fence line. This is insane, Emily whispered as they reached Michael's truck, hidden 3 blocks away. We could be arrested. Or worse. Michael's face was grim in the dim glow of a distant streetlight. If what we suspect is true, Ethan Brooks has already suffered worse. We owe it to him to find out. Ranger jumped into the truck bed, sheltering under the camper shell as Emily and Michael climbed into the cab. The streets of Silver Creek were deserted, most residents having sought shelter from the storm. As they drove toward the outskirts of town, Emily spotted the black pickup parked outside Mac's bar, Leeds clearly visible through the window. He's not following us, she said with relief. Not yet, Michael replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. But once he discovers we've left Franklin's. The unspoken threat hung between them as they turned onto the county road, heading toward Holloway Farm, and whatever grim secret awaited them there. The storm intensified as Michael's truck navigated the muddy service road that skirted the western edge of Holloway's property. Raindrops hammered against the windshield like bullets, and lightning periodically illuminated the landscape in harsh, blue-white flashes. There, Michael pointed through the downpour. That break in the tree line. The old barn should be about 200 yards in. Emily squinted through the passenger window, barely making out the dense woods that marked the property boundary. How do we get in without being seen? We wait for the next lightning strike. Michael said, killing the engine and headlights. The guards usually shelter in the main compound during storms. But we need to move fast. In the truck bed, Ranger whined anxiously. Emily reached back, opening the window between cab and camper shell to stroke his wet fur. It's okay, boy. We'll be quick. The next lightning flash revealed a dilapidated structure barely visible through the trees. The abandoned barn. Its roof partially collapsed on one side. Thunder followed almost immediately, shaking the truck. Now, Michael urged, grabbing a powerful flashlight and a small shovel. Emily clutched Franklin's revolver in her jacket pocket, following Michael into the deluge. They moved swiftly through a gap in the fence, Ranger leading the way, his nose close to the ground despite the rain. The wet grass muffled their footsteps as they darted from tree to tree, using the storm's fury as cover. Halfway to the barn, Ranger suddenly stopped, hackles raised. Before Emily could react, the dog bolted toward a thicket of bushes to their right. "Ranger," she hissed urgently. A figure emerged from the bushes, stumbling backward as the German shepherd cornered him. Lightning revealed a young man, perhaps 20, wearing a Holloway farm rain jacket. "Call him off," the young man pleaded, pressing his back against a tree. "Please." Michael stepped forward, gripping Ranger's collar. "Who are you?" "Tyler Williams," the man stammered. "I work the night shift. Just taking a shortcut home." Emily studied his frightened face. "At midnight? In this weather?" Tyler's eyes darted between them. "Look, I don't want trouble. I didn't see nothing. Just let me go." "What didn't you see?" Michael pressed, maintaining his hold on Ranger, who continued to growl. Tyler's resistance crumbled. "The barn. What they did there. What they buried." He shuddered visibly. "I was working that night. Heard the shouting, then..." His voice dropped to a whisper. "The gunshot." Emily felt her blood run cold. "Ethan Brooks." Tyler nodded miserably. "He was a good guy, always fair to us workers. Then he found something in the barn, packages hidden under the floorboards. Told Leeds he was going to the police." "What was in the packages?" Michael asked. "Drugs, I think. Lots of them. Holloway's been moving product through the farm for years, using migrant workers as mules sometimes." Emily exchanged a glance with Michael. "Did you see what happened to Ethan?" Tyler shook his head. "Didn't need to. Leeds and Wilson took him to the barn. Holloway showed up later. Only 3 people came out." His eyes fell on Ranger. "Thought they killed the dog too. Heard Wilson bragging about shooting it." "We need to document this," Michael said. "Will you testify to what you know?" Fear flashed across Tyler's face. "They'll kill me. We can protect you," Emily promised, though she wasn't sure how. A distant engine sound cut through the storm. Headlights appeared on the main access road, bouncing wildly as a vehicle approached at high speed. "That's Leeds' truck," Tyler said, panic rising in his voice. "Someone must have seen you." "The barn," Michael urged. "We need proof before they get here." They sprinted the remaining distance, Tyler reluctantly following. The barn door hung partially off its hinges, creaking ominously in the wind. Inside, the air was heavy with the sense of damp wood and decay. Michael swept his flashlight across the earthen floor. "Look for disturbed ground." Ranger moved purposefully toward the back corner, where rotting bales of hay were stacked against the wall. The dog began digging frantically, claws tearing at the packed earth. "He's found something," Emily breathed, joining Ranger's efforts with the shovel. The approaching vehicle stopped outside. Car doors slammed, and voices called out over the storm. "They're coming," Tyler whispered, peering through a crack in the wall. Leeds, Wilson, and 2 others. Michael dug faster, the shovel striking something solid about 2 feet down. He brushed away dirt to reveal plastic sheeting. "Evidence," he said grimly. "Tyler, take a video with your phone. We need documentation." Tyler hesitated only briefly before pulling out his smartphone, recording as Michael carefully pulled back the plastic to reveal several wrapped packages. "Drugs," Emily confirmed. "Just like you said." Michael continued digging beside the packages. The shovel scraped against something else, something larger. More plastic sheeting, wrapped around a long, unmistakable shape. Emily felt sick. "We need to go? Now. We have enough to take to the state police." Outside, flashlight beams cut through the rain, moving steadily toward the barn. "Too late," Tyler moaned. "They're surrounding us." Michael closed the plastic over their grim discovery. "Is there another way out?" Tyler nodded. "Loading bay in the back. It leads to the old fire road." They moved silently toward the rear of the barn, Ranger following closely. Just as they reached the loading bay doors, a shotgun blast splintered the wood beside them. "We know you're in there, Hayes." Leeds' voice boomed over the storm. "Come out now, and maybe we talk instead of shoot." Michael pushed Emily behind a stack of crates. "Run for the truck when I give the signal. I'll create a diversion." "I'm not leaving you," Emily protested. "You have to," Michael insisted. "Get that evidence to the state police. It's our only chance." Before she could argue further, the front door of the barn crashed open. Leeds and Wilson entered, shotguns raised, flanked by two other men Emily didn't recognize. "Check the back," Leeds ordered one of the men. Michael squeezed Emily's hand, then suddenly stood. "Looking for me, Leeds?" All guns swung toward him. In the momentary distraction, Emily, Tyler, and Ranger slipped through the loading bay doors into the driving rain. They hadn't gone 20 feet when a gunshot rang out from inside the barn. "Michael!" Emily cried, turning back. Tyler grabbed her arm. "We can't help him if we're dead too." "The truck." Now, tears mixing with rain on her face, Emily ran toward the distant tree line, Ranger at her side. Behind them, more shouts and another gunshot echoed through the storm. They reached the fence line just as headlights swept the field. Wilson's voice carried through the darkness. "They're heading for the road." Tyler pointed to a narrow deer path leading deeper into the woods. "This way? It's longer but safer." As they plunged into the underbrush, Emily's mind raced with terrible possibilities. Was Michael dead? Had she left him to die? And even if they reached the state police, would anyone believe their story? The weight of Franklin's revolver in her pocket reminded her of what was at stake. This wasn't just about a rescued dog anymore. It was about Ethan Brooks, about justice, about exposing the corruption that had poisoned Silver Creek for generations. With renewed determination, Emily pushed forward through the storm, knowing that Richard Holloway would stop at nothing to silence them, and that their only hope lay in reaching help before his men caught up to them. Emily's cabin stood dark and silent in the pale moonlight, its broken front door hastily repaired with plywood and duct tape. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at Holloway's barn. 3 days that had turned Emily's world inside out. She sat at her kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, Ranger curled protectively at her feet. The German Shepherd had hardly left her side since that night, as if sensing her fragile emotional state. On the table lay a stack of forms and statements, the bureaucratic aftermath of justice slowly grinding into motion. Against all odds, Michael had survived. Leeds' shot had only grazed his shoulder, and in the confusion that followed, he'd managed to escape through a hole in the barn's rotting floor. State police, alerted by Franklin's persistent calls, had arrived before Holloway's men could track them all down. What they found at the barn had been enough to arrest Richard Holloway on multiple charges: drug trafficking, evidence tampering, and, most significantly, the murder of Ethan Brooks. The wrapped packages contained nearly $2 million worth of heroin, and the larger bundle held Ethan's body, just as they had feared. Tyler Williams had proven to be the key witness, his testimony corroborating what they had discovered. He was now in protective custody, awaiting the trial that would likely send Holloway away for life. Justice had prevailed, but at a cost. Emily hadn't felt safe returning to her cabin until today, after Holloway's bail had been denied. Even now, every creak and groan of the old building set her nerves on edge. "We did it, Ranger," she murmured, reaching down to stroke the dog's head. "We got him." The German Shepherd's ears suddenly perked up, his body tensing. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he fixed his gaze on the back door. Emily froze, straining to hear what had alerted Ranger. For several seconds, there was nothing but the gentle lapping of lake water outside. Then, a soft scraping sound, like metal on metal. Someone was picking the lock. With trembling hands, Emily reached for her cell phone, only to find the battery dead. The landline had been disconnected during Leeds' first break-in and hadn't been repaired. She was cut off, alone except for Ranger. "Good boy," she whispered, reaching for Franklin's revolver, which she'd kept loaded and nearby since returning. "Stay quiet." She moved silently toward the living room, positioning herself behind the heavy oak bookcase that offered both concealment and a clear view of the back entrance. Ranger followed, his body low to the ground, hackles raised. The lock clicked. The door eased open an inch, then wider. A shadow slipped inside, a large man moving with surprising stealth for his size. Even in the darkness, Emily recognized Jeffrey Leeds' bullish silhouette. Come out! Come out! Wherever you are, Leeds called softly, his voice unnervingly calm. Holloway sent me with a message before they took him away. Emily remained motionless, her finger resting near the revolver's trigger. Leeds carried something in his right hand, a hunting knife that caught the moonlight streaming through the windows. You think this is over because Richard's in jail? Leeds continued, moving deeper into the cabin. The Holloways have friends you've never even heard of. Friends in places you can't imagine. He ran the knife along the back of the sofa, slicing into the fabric. They want you to know, this is just beginning. Ranger trembled beside Emily, restraining himself only because of her hand on his collar. Leeds was less than 10 feet away now, methodically destroying her possessions as he moved through the cabin. Maybe I'll start with that mutt of yours, Leeds mused, scanning the darkness. Finish what Wilson started back in August. Emily's grip tightened on the revolver. One shot, that's all she might get. If she missed, a floorboard creaked beneath her foot. Leeds whirled toward the sound, knife raised. There you are, he grinned, taking a step in her direction. Before Emily could raise the gun, the front door burst open with a crash. Leeds spun around as a powerful flashlight beam blinded him. Drop the knife, Leeds. Franklin Moore's voice commanded, surprisingly strong for a man his age. He stood in the doorway, holding what appeared to be an ancient shotgun. I've been waiting 90 years to shoot a Holloway man. You'll do just fine. Leeds hesitated, knife still clutched in his hand. You're bluffing, old man. You don't have the guts. The shotgun roared in response, the blast deafening in the confined space. Leeds howled as buckshot tore into his leg, the knife clattering to the floor as he fell. Next one goes higher, Franklin promised, pumping the shotgun to chamber another round. I may be old, but I was a Marine in Korea. I don't miss twice. Emily emerged from her hiding place, revolver still trained on Leeds, who was clutching his bleeding leg and cursing viciously. How did you know? She asked Franklin, her voice shaking with leftover adrenaline. The old man nodded toward the window. Saw his truck parked down the road when I was driving by. Figured he wasn't here to apologize. He kept the shotgun leveled at Leeds' chest. Called the state police on my way. They should be here any minute. As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance, drawing rapidly closer. Leeds glared up at them, his face contorted with pain and hatred. This changes nothing, he spat. You think Richard's the only one with power in this county? The only one with something to protect? You've kicked the hornet's nest now. Franklin looked down at him with something between pity and disgust. The hornets are dying, Jeffrey. One by one. Silver Creek's changing. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows as police cars pulled up outside. Ranger padded over to Leeds and stood guard, a low growl ensuring the wounded man stayed put. Emily lowered the revolver, her hands trembling with delayed shock. Thank you, Franklin. If you hadn't come. But I did, the old man said simply. That's what neighbors do in Silver Creek. The real Silver Creek, not Holloway's version. He looked around at the damaged cabin. You'll stay with me tonight. Marion's made up the guest room. As state troopers entered and took control of Leeds, Emily knelt beside Ranger, burying her face in his fur. The German shepherd licked her cheek once, a gesture of reassurance that somehow meant more than any human words could have. Outside, the first hints of dawn were breaking over Evergreen Lake. A new day for Silver Creek, and for Emily Carter, who had come seeking solitude but found purpose instead. Come on, Ranger, she whispered, rising to her feet. Let's go home, our real home. As they walked out into the cool morning air, Emily knew that Holloway's shadow would linger over Silver Creek for some time. But looking at Franklin's weathered face and feeling Ranger's solid presence beside her, she also knew with absolute certainty that shadows always fade when exposed to enough light. 6 months had passed since Richard Holloway's arrest. Spring had returned to Silver Creek, bringing with it renewal that seemed to extend beyond just the natural world. Emily stood on her newly rebuilt porch, watching as Ranger bounded across the clearing, chasing a mourning dove that had no real intention of being caught. He looks happy, Michael observed, joining her with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His left arm still occasionally stiffened, a reminder of the bullet that had grazed him in the barn, but the doctors had assured him that with time, even that minor issue would fade. "We all do," Emily replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The morning air still carried a slight chill, though the daffodils pushing through the soil promised warmer days ahead. The trial had concluded 3 weeks ago, with Richard Holloway sentenced to life in prison without parole for Ethan Brooks' murder, plus additional decades for drug trafficking and various other charges. Jeffrey Leeds had received 30 years for his role as accomplice and for the attempted murder of Emily. The corruption that had gripped Silver Creek for generations was finally being dismantled, one conviction at a time. Franklin called this morning, Emily said, sipping her coffee. The town council approved his proposal to rename the community center after Ethan. Michael nodded approvingly. It's the least they could do. Without him, none of this would have come to light. They fell into comfortable silence, watching Ranger explore the lakeside. The dog had become something of a local celebrity, the canine who cracked the case, as the Silver Creek Gazette had dubbed him. More importantly to Emily, he had become her constant companion, his nightmares growing less frequent as time passed, just as her own had. "Have you thought any more about the offer?" Michael asked after a while. Emily knew which offer he meant. The state police had approached her about joining their rural crimes task force as a civilian consultant. Her background in research and her experience with the Holloway case made her an ideal candidate, they'd said. "I'm still considering it," she answered truthfully. "It would mean traveling sometimes. I'd worry about Ranger." "I could watch him when you're away," Michael offered, not for the first time. Since that night at the barn, their relationship had evolved from reluctant allies to friends to something more neither had fully defined yet. Emily smiled. "He'd like that. He adores you." "Smart dog," Michael replied with a grin. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Franklin Moore's ancient Buick appeared around the bend, moving at the cautious pace of a driver who had recently turned 92 and had no intention of risking his newly renewed license. "Right on time," Emily noted, checking her watch. "I told him we'd wait." Franklin emerged from the car with the assistance of a handsome wooden cane, a gift from Emily, carved from a piece of walnut found on her property. Marion waved from the passenger seat, but remained in the car, giving them privacy for what was to come. "Beautiful day," Franklin declared, making his way carefully up the porch steps. "Perfect for what we're doing." Emily nodded, emotions suddenly tightening her throat. "I think so too." Together, the three of them walked down to the lake's edge, where the water lapped gently against the shore. Ranger trotted over to join them, pressing against Emily's leg as if sensing the solemnity of the moment. Franklin opened the small wooden box he'd brought with him. Inside lay a simple bronze plaque, small enough to fit on the large boulder that marked the spot where Emily had pulled Ranger from the lake that fateful night. Michael helped secure the plaque to the stone while Emily steadied Franklin, who insisted on overseeing the installation despite his arthritis. When they finished, all three stepped back to read the inscription. "In memory of Ethan Brooks, whose courage led to truth, and whose friend led the way October 2023." Beside the words was a small paw print impression, a reminder of the loyal companion who had survived against all odds to see justice done. "He would have liked this," Franklin said softly. "Ethan always loved this lake. Used to talk about saving up to buy a little place near the water someday." Emily felt tears threatening. She had never met Ethan Brooks in life, yet somehow felt connected to him through everything that had happened. "His family in Texas sent me a letter," she shared. "They're coming up next month for the community center dedication." Franklin nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. "Silver Creek is healing. Slowly but surely." As if to emphasize the point, a family drove past on the main road, waving cheerfully. New residents who had purchased one of the parcels of Holloway land that had been seized by the state and resold. Throughout the area, farms that had once been part of Holloway's empire were now being worked by honest owners, some of them former employees who had testified against their boss. "There's still work to be done," Michael commented, watching the car disappear around the bend. "The new sheriff still has his hands full, and some of Holloway's old friends haven't given up entirely. But they no longer own this town," Emily replied firmly. Franklin checked his watch. "Town council meeting starts in an hour. They're voting on the new zoning regulations today, the ones that will prevent another Holloway from buying up half the county." "Need a ride?" Michael offered. The old man shook his head. "Marion's driving me. You two enjoy your day off." He winked at Emily. Maybe take that dog for a proper walk. He's looking at you like he's got plans." After Franklin departed, Emily and Michael lingered by the memorial stone, Ranger sitting patiently between them. The German shepherd's eyes, once filled with fear and pain, now watched the lake with calm interest as waterbirds skimmed its surface. "What do you think?" Michael asked, his hand finding Emily's. "Ready for that walk?" Emily looked around at the place that had become more than just a refuge. It had become a home, filled with purpose and connection she hadn't expected to find when she'd moved to Silver Creek seeking solitude. "More than ready," she answered, giving his hand a squeeze. "Let's take the long trail today." As they set off along the lakeshore, Ranger trotting happily ahead, Emily realized that Silver Creek would never be the same town it had been before that night when she'd heard a strange sound and decided to investigate. None of them would, but perhaps that was the point. Some changes, though born in darkness and pain, ultimately led to something better. The shadow of Richard Holloway would always be part of Silver Creek's story, but it would no longer be the defining chapter. That night, as dusk fell over Evergreen Lake, Emily sat on her porch with Ranger's head resting on her lap. In the distance, lights from new homes twinkled along the shoreline. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The task force had called again. A case in the next county needed attention, and Ethan's family would soon arrive, looking to understand what had happened to their son. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, Emily found herself at peace. Ranger sighed contentedly as she stroked his ears, his eyes drifting closed in absolute trust. "We did good, Ranger," she whispered, echoing the words she'd spoken on that terrible night when Leeds had nearly taken everything from them. But this time, there was no fear in her voice, only certainty and gratitude. The dog's tail thumped once against the porch boards, as if in agreement. Outside their circle of lamplight, Silver Creek continued its slow journey toward healing, a process that would take years, perhaps generations. But it had begun, and that, Emily knew, was enough for now. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment, "I watched all the way through," and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting for those of you watching.